Michael Harris stared at the crumpled receipt in his hand, his pulse hammering. It wasn't the $250 dinner charge that caught his attention, it was the date and time. Last Thursday, 7:30 p.m. The same night, Laura had said she was meeting a client to finalize an interior design project. His brow furrowed as he tried to make sense of it. They didn't share an account for her business expenses, but this wasn't on her work card either. It was on their shared personal account. He dropped the receipt onto the granite kitchen counter and stared out the window. Their home, a spacious suburban house he had built with his own two hands, felt suddenly foreign. It wasn't the house itself, every beam and nail had his mark on it. It was the creeping sense that something was wrong, that the life he had worked so hard to build might be unraveling. Earlier that week, Laura had been distant, brushing off his questions about her late nights with vague excuses. "It's for a high-profile client," she had said, flashing her practiced smile. But now, that smile felt more like a mask. Jason Parker, his best friend, had unknowingly added fuel to his growing suspicion during their lunch the day before. "Hey man," Jason had said, his tone casual but his words weighted. "I saw Laura at the Ivy last week. She was with some guy, looked pretty cozy. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but—" "You guys good," Michael had waved it off, pretending not to care. But now, standing alone in the kitchen with that damning receipt, he couldn't ignore the knot in his gut. Taking a deep breath, he slid the receipt into his pocket and grabbed his phone. "Jason," he said after a few rings, his tone sharp, "I need to talk." "Can you meet me at your office?" Jason's office was a sleek space bathed in natural light, a reflection of his success as a real estate agent. Michael paced the room while Jason sat on the edge of his desk, his arms crossed. "What's going on?" Jason asked, concern etched on his face. Michael stopped pacing and faced him. "When you saw Laura at the Ivy, what exactly did you see?" Jason hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "I mean, it could be nothing, but they were sitting close. She looked happy, like really happy. It didn't seem like a business dinner, if you get what I mean." Michael's jaw tightened. "Did you recognize the guy?" "No," Jason admitted. "He was well-dressed, probably mid to late 30s. "Dark hair, that's all I got." Michael nodded, his mind racing. "Thanks, I needed to hear it." Jason frowned. "Mike, are you sure you want to go down this road?" "Maybe it's just a misunderstanding." Michael's eyes hardened. "If it's a misunderstanding, I'll find out, but if it's not—" He trailed off, his meaning clear. That evening, Laura breezed into the house, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. She was dressed impeccably, as always, her designer bag slung over one shoulder. "Hey," she said, barely glancing at Michael as she headed toward the stairs. "Busy day?" he asked, his tone neutral. She paused, her hand on the railing. "Exhausting," she replied, her voice clipped. "I'm going to shower." Michael watched her ascend the stairs, his stomach churning. Her dismissiveness, once something he could brush off, now felt like a glaring red flag. After she disappeared into their bedroom, he retrieved a small box from the garage. Inside was a hidden camera, something he'd ordered years ago for added security during a remodeling project. Now, it had a far more personal purpose. The next morning, Michael woke early and installed the camera in the living room, carefully concealing it behind a decorative vase on the bookshelf. He tested the angle, ensuring it covered the entire space, including the couch where Laura often worked on her laptop. His decision to install the camera wasn't made lightly. He wasn't the type to jump to conclusions, but the evidence was piling up. Her increasing distance, the mysterious dinner receipt, Jason's observation it was all too much to ignore. That evening, Laura announced she had another late meeting. "Don't wait up," she said, grabbing her purse. Michael nodded, forcing a smile. Have a good night." Once she was gone, he sat in the living room, staring at the spot where the camera was hidden. For 16 years, he had trusted Laura implicitly. But now, doubt gnawed at him like a relentless tide. 2 days later, Michael met Jason for lunch again. This time, his demeanor was colder, more focused. "She went out again last night," Michael said, pushing his half-eaten sandwich aside. Jason raised an eyebrow. "Did she say where?" "Another client meeting," Michael scoffed. "I'm done asking questions. I'm going to get answers." Jason leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Mike, don't do anything crazy." "You need to keep your head on straight." Michael nodded, though his jaw remained clenched. "Don't worry, I've got a plan." As Jason left, Michael couldn't help but feel a twinge of gratitude. For all his flaws, Jason had always been a loyal friend, but loyalty wouldn't fix this. Only the truth would. That night, after Laura retreated to bed, Michael retrieved the camera's footage and loaded it onto his laptop. His heart pounded as he clicked through the timestamps, watching the seemingly mundane moments of their living room. Then, at 9:45 p.m. on Thursday, the screen showed Laura entering the house, her hand entwined with another man's. Michael froze, his breath caught in his throat. The man fit Jason's description: perfectly dark hair, well-dressed, mid to late 30s. They sat on the couch, laughing and talking like old lovers, and then, without hesitation, they kissed. Michael slammed the laptop shut, his hands trembling. The confirmation felt like a punch to the gut, but beneath the pain, a cold fury began to rise. She had brought him into their house. The house he had built, brick by brick. Michael leaned back in his chair, his jaw tightening. Whatever love he still felt for Laura was now buried under a mountain of betrayal. This wasn't just an affair, it was a violation of everything they had built together. And Michael wasn't going to let it slide. 3 days later, Michael parked his truck in the driveway, his mind set. He'd spent the entire day sifting through Laura's contacts, narrowing down one name that stood out: Ryan Mitchell. A high-end developer she'd mentioned once, casually, during dinner months ago. At the time, it seemed insignificant, just a client hiring her for a luxury project. Now, it was a glaring lead. Inside the house, Laura sat on the couch, her laptop open but her attention elsewhere. She jumped slightly when Michael entered, his boots heavy against the floor. "You're home early," she said, her tone light but her eyes flickering with unease. "Yeah," Michael replied, setting his keys on the counter. "Thought I'd take a break." "Been working too damn much lately, don't you think?" She nodded, forcing a smile. "You deserve it." He leaned against the counter, folding his arms. "Funny thing about this house," he said, his tone casual but laced with steel. "Every corner of it reminds me of what I built. Blood, sweat, and tears. Makes me think about how easily something can be torn apart." Laura's fingers faltered on the keyboard. "Are you okay? You seem off." Michael stared at her, his expression unreadable. "Just reflecting, I guess." The tension hung between them, thick and suffocating. Laura's phone buzzed on the coffee table, breaking the silence. She grabbed it quickly, glancing at the screen before setting it face down. Michael noted her stiffness, the slight tremor in her hand. "I'm going to shower," Laura said abruptly, closing her laptop. She moved toward the stairs, her steps quicker than usual. Michael waited until he heard the water running before picking up her phone. The lock screen displayed a single message: "Ryan, same time tomorrow." The next evening, Michael made his move. He drove to the Ivy and parked across the street, his truck blending in with the line of vehicles. Through the restaurant's floor-to-ceiling windows, he spotted Laura almost immediately. She was seated at a corner table, her face illuminated by candlelight. Opposite her sat Ryan Mitchell, his features sharp and polished, a man who clearly enjoyed the finer things in life. Michael watched as they leaned in close, their conversation animated, punctuated by laughter. For a moment, he felt a flash of disbelief that this was his wife, the woman he had loved for 16 years, smiling like that for someone else. But the disbelief was quickly replaced by cold determination. He snapped a few photos with his phone enough to capture their intimacy without being noticed. Then, without a second thought, he started his truck and drove back home. When Laura returned later that night, Michael was in the living room, a glass of whiskey in hand. She hesitated in the doorway, her coat draped over one arm. "Late meeting?" he asked, not looking up. "Yeah," she replied. "Ran longer than I expected." Michael finally met her gaze, his expression calm but piercing. "You work too hard, Laura. Maybe you should take a break." Her smile faltered, and she nodded quickly. "I'll head to bed. Good night." As she disappeared upstairs, Michael's grip tightened around the glass. Tomorrow, he thought. Tomorrow this ends. The following morning, Michael called Jason. "I need a favor," he said, his voice low. "What's going on?" Jason asked. "Meet me at my office. I'll explain there." At the office, Jason sat across from Michael, his brow furrowed. "You sure you want to do this?" Michael nodded. "I'm not going to let her spin this into something it's not. I've got proof now, photos, messages." "I'm done waiting for her to come clean." Jason sighed, leaning back in his chair. "And Ryan," Michael's jaw tightened. "I'll deal with him too." Jason hesitated. "Just don't lose your cool, Mike. You've got the upper hand, use it." Michael gave a curt nod. "I know what I'm doing." That evening, Michael waited until Laura returned home. She walked through the door, her expression bright but guarded. "Hey," she said quickly, kicking off her heels. "Long day." Michael stood in the living room, arms crossed. "We need to talk." Her smile vanished. "What about?" He gestured toward the couch. "Sit." Laura hesitated but eventually complied, perching on the edge of the cushion. Michael pulled his phone from his pocket and tossed it onto the coffee table. The screen displayed the photos he had taken at the Ivy, her face drained of color. "Michael, I can explain." "Don't," he snapped, his voice cutting through her words. "I don't want excuses. I don't want lies. I want the truth." Laura opened her mouth, then closed it, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. "You brought him into my house," Michael said, his voice trembling with barely restrained fury. "You sat on that couch with him, you kissed him. And then you had the audacity to look me in the eye and lie." Tears welled in Laura's eyes. "I didn't mean for this to happen." "Save it," Michael barked. "You didn't mean for this to happen. You made choices, Laura. You chose to betray me in the worst possible way." She buried her face in her hands, sobbing. "I was lonely, Michael." "You've been so busy with work and I felt invisible?" Michael scoffed, his anger boiling over. "So your solution was to crawl into bed with someone else? To bring him into the home I built for us?" Laura looked up, her face streaked with tears. "I made a mistake." "No," Michael interrupted, his voice cold. "A mistake is forgetting to lock the door. What you did was calculated. You lied to me. You disrespected me, and now you're going to face the consequences." He stood, towering over her. "I'm filing for divorce. You can pack your things and leave by the end of the week." Laura's sobs intensified. "Please, Michael, it's over," he said, his tone final. "You made your bed, Laura. Now lie in it." 2 days later, Michael parked his truck in front of Ryan Mitchell's office building. The sleek, glass-fronted structure was a stark contrast to the rugged practicality of his construction sites. He stepped out, his boots striking the pavement with purpose as he entered the lobby. Ryan's assistant was seated behind a modern desk, her smile polite but cautious. "Do you have an appointment?" Michael didn't break stride. "Tell him Michael Harris is here. He'll want to make time." The assistant blinked but picked up the phone, murmuring into the receiver. Within moments, Ryan appeared in the hallway, his confident demeanor faltering as he spotted Michael. He approached hesitantly, extending a hand. "Michael, right?" "Laura's husband." Michael ignored the handshake, his gaze cold. "We need to talk, privately." Ryan glanced nervously around the lobby before gesturing toward his office. "Of course." "This way." The office was spacious, filled with expensive furniture and the faint scent of leather. Michael closed the door behind them and leaned against it, arms crossed. Ryan fidgeted, his polished exterior cracking under the weight of Michael's silent scrutiny. "I'll cut to the chase," Michael began, his voice low and controlled. "I know about you and Laura." Ryan's face turned pale. He opened his mouth to speak, but Michael held up a hand. "Save it. I'm not here to hear excuses or apologies. I just want to make something crystal clear." Michael stepped closer, his towering frame imposing. "Stay away from my house. Stay away from my life. You so much as look in my direction, and I'll make sure everyone in your world knows what kind of man you are." Ryan swallowed hard, nodding quickly. I didn't mean to." Michael's expression darkened. "Don't insult me by pretending this was an accident. You knew exactly what you were doing. Now you'll live with the consequences." Without waiting for a response, Michael turned and walked out, his boots echoing in the hallway. Ryan didn't follow. That evening, Michael arrived home to find Laura waiting for him in the living room. She stood as he entered, her arms crossed defensively. "We need to talk." Michael set his keys on the counter, his expression unreadable. "Go ahead." She hesitated, her confidence wavering. "I know you've been distant, and I can tell you're angry. But I think we can fix this if we're both willing to try." Michael's laugh was sharp, humorless. "Fix this? You think this is something we can fix?" Laura flinched at his tone. "I made a mistake, Michael. I was feeling neglected and—" "Stop," Michael interrupted, his voice rising. "You don't get to stand there and play the victim. You didn't make a mistake, you made a choice. Over and over again." Tears filled her eyes, but Michael didn't relent. "You brought another man into my home, into my life. Do you even understand the level of betrayal that is?" "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I never meant to hurt you." Michael shook his head, his anger bubbling to the surface. "You didn't just hurt me. You destroyed everything we built together, and for what? Some thrill? Some fantasy?" Laura reached for him, but he stepped back, his expression hard. "Don't. Whatever this is, whatever you're trying to salvage, it's over. I've already filed for divorce." Her face crumpled and she sank onto the couch, sobbing. "Please, Michael, don't do this. We can still fix it. I'll do whatever it takes." Michael's voice was ice. "You had your chance. You made your choice. Now you'll live with it." He turned and walked upstairs, leaving her alone with her tears. For the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of clarity. This was the beginning of his freedom. 1 month later, Michael stood in the living room of what was now officially his house. The divorce had been finalized that morning, and with it came a clean break. Laura had fought for spousal support, claiming she deserved a portion of his income after 16 years together, but the judge had sided with Michael. Her infidelity, combined with the evidence he had meticulously gathered, left her with nothing but her personal belongings. Michael exhaled deeply. The air felt lighter, the silence in the house no longer oppressive but peaceful. He glanced at the dining table where a small stack of envelopes sat. Among them was a card from Jason and Emma congratulating him on closing this chapter. As if on cue, Jason's truck pulled into the driveway. Michael stepped outside, letting the cold January air fill his lungs. Jason hopped out, a 6-pack of beer in hand. "Thought you could use some company," Jason said, grinning as he handed Michael the beer. Michael smirked. You know me too well. Come on in. The two settled in the living room, beers in hand. Jason leaned back on the couch, his expression turning serious. How does it feel? Michael took a sip, his gaze focused on the fire crackling in the hearth. Like I just got my life back. It's not easy, but it's clean. No more lies, no more pretending. Jason nodded. You've been a class act through all this, man. Most people would have lost it. Michael chuckled bitterly. Trust me, I wanted to, but what good would it have done? She's out of my life now, that's all that matters. Jason raised his bottle. To new beginnings, then. Michael clinked his bottle against Jason's. To new beginnings. The sound of tires crunching on gravel drew their attention. A familiar white sedan pulled into the driveway. Michael's jaw tightened as Laura stepped out, bundled in a coat. She hesitated near her car, clearly debating whether to approach. Jason stood, his voice low. Want me to handle this? Michael shook his head, setting his beer down. No, I'll deal with her. He stepped outside, closing the door firmly behind him. Laura stood by her car, her eyes red and puffy. Michael, I needed to talk to you. There's nothing left to talk about, Michael said evenly, crossing his arms. Please, she whispered, her voice cracking. I know I've lost everything, but I need you to understand I wasn't myself. I made a terrible mistake, Michael's expression hardened. Stop. You don't get to rewrite the story. You knew exactly what you were doing, and you didn't care who you hurt. You didn't just betray me, you betrayed everything we built together. Tears streamed down her face. I know, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life, but we were together for 16 years. Doesn't that mean anything to you? Michael's tone was cold, final. It did, but you threw it away. You didn't just cheat on me, Laura, you brought him into my house. You broke something that can't be fixed. She took a shaky step forward. Michael, I don't have anyone else. I can't do this on my own. That's not my problem, he said, his voice devoid of sympathy. You made your choices. Now you live with them. Goodbye, Laura. He turned and walked back inside, locking the door behind him. Jason raised an eyebrow as Michael returned to the living room. She gone, Michael nodded, picking up his beer. For good, Jason grinned. Good riddance. Michael sank into the couch, the weight of the past few months lifting. For the first time in years, he felt free. The future was his, and he wasn't looking back.